All right, good morning, everybody. It is 9:30, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Brandy Ludlam, and I'm the district lead SEL school counselor. So this is being live streamed this morning. So first, I'm going to introduce Dr. Erica Bissell back here, and she has a statement to make about our audio this morning.
Thank you, Ms. Ludlam. I did want to just remind everybody that we are recording this meeting, and if there are audio issues for those watching at home, please know that we will work quickly to resolve those, and just bear with us. We are having some audio issues that we're working on behind the scenes. So we will get all the questions that are shared by the audience out to you as quickly as possible, and we'll do our best to have the audio as clear as possible. Thank you.
All right, so now I'm going to turn it over to Zan Tracy Pender, who is the Director of School Counseling and Advisement.
Good morning. We wanted us to quickly start this out because we did it last year. So we wanted to tell you just a quick few stories about what this tool did for our students, because that's the most important part is of what success stories came out of it. So when we did this, I'm just going to share a few of them with you. We had one student that came forward and told us that that they had lost a spouse, the parent did, and the parent was withdrawn and struggling to keep the family together and having a hard time. We were able to get them resources to help them move forward based on a parent loss. We had a student that came to us and told us, reported severe child abuse, had never told anybody before, and because they took the survey, we were able to get them help. We had a student that came to the counselor and says, I didn't tell the truth on the survey. And then the counselor explored it. The child was severely harming themselves in a way with self-harm. It's not suicide, but self-harming. We were able to get that child help. We had a student that had a complete suicide plan, never told anybody until the assessment. And last one I want to share, we had one student that took the assessment, ostracism. He was very alone and not being included. The counselor got involved. We got him in small groups. He started doing well. He went from an F student to an A student by the end of the year by being involved in groups and helping them out. So in the long run, the tool that we're going to share with you today is a tool we used last year, and we have had success stories when we're able to help a student, and that's the bottom line. We're here to help students. So we're going to explain that. I'm going to turn it back over to Brandy Ludlam. She's going to give you a little overview from the state, and then we're going to turn it over to Dr. Gilman.
So we provide the option of the Terrace Metrics Behavioral Health Assessment in response to Act 213, which was signed by our governor. This is an optional assessment, and we choose to do active consent, which means that parents have the option of giving this assessment to their students. So parents have to say, I do consent to this. So whether parents do have the option of saying, I do not consent to this, or not responding at all. So if a parent says, I do consent, we allow the student to take the assessment. But if they say, I do not consent, or do not respond at all, we will not allow the student to take the assessment. So it is my honor to introduce our speaker this morning, Dr. Rich Gilman, who is a licensed child and clinical psychologist and president of Terrace Metrics Incorporated. He received his PhD from the University of South Carolina, formerly on the faculties of Georgia State University, the University of Kentucky, and the University of Cincinnati Medical School. He served as Director of Psychology and Special Education and Director of School-Based Mental Health Programming at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center and Director of the PTSD program at UC Medical School. Dr. Gilman is a Fellow of the American Psychological Association and the International Society of Quality of Life Studies. He has published over 100 peer-reviewed papers on factors that best predict optimal mental health, academic, and behavioral outcomes across the lifespan. He is past International Research Fellow at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Gilman received his MBA in 2018 from Oxford University. Dr. Gilman currently serves as the president and co-founder of Terrace Metrics.
Thank you so much, and thank you for coming. And for those of you who are online, thank you. It really is, for me, it's a homecoming. I'm originally not from South Carolina. I'm from South Dakota, so at least there's a South there. And I grew up there, but my formative years were spent here in this community, in fact, in this district, during my training many, many years ago. I learned a lot. Those 6 years that I spent here were the most, as I've said, shaped what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, learning through the community what was most important. And I'm looking at that motto, putting children first. That is near and dear to all of our hearts, and that is exactly why I'm so proud. I mean, we're nationwide. Our system is nationwide. It's held in some of the largest schools in America, some of the most remote areas of America, but we treat every district like it's our only. But for me personally, I'm so proud. I'm most proud to be serving Lexington One with what we're doing. Now, there's a lot of questions, always there's a lot of questions that parents have, and that's why I'm here. I came down here to make sure that we address all the questions that you have. I am not here to convince. I'm here to explain and answer. So please feel free to ask questions, but I am going to address some of the questions that are often asked by parents, regardless of school and where we are at. So the first thing we're going to do is talk a little bit about what we're going to do, and that's understanding how this concept of, we call it behavioral health. Think of resiliency. That's the key. Resiliency is the most important framework that we're from. You're going to learn how it's being used to measure, monitor, and manage the behavioral health of all students from grades 3 through 12. But more importantly to me, again, to address any concerns and questions that you have. What we will not do is I'm not going to speak on behalf or advocate for any movement, including SEL. First of all, we're not SEL. We use SEL terms, but we are not SEL. SEL is based on a different framework. We're not that. We are resiliency. We are based on resiliency science, and I'll explain this in just a minute. I will talk about the limitations of SEL. I will do that. But I just want to make sure that we're all understanding that what we are doing is fundamentally different than any other movement or framework that's out there. It's an extension of what we've been doing for many years. I'm not going to urge anyone to participate. That's never been our position. That is a choice that's inherently very personal for every family, and we respect that. So please understand, I'm not here for that. That is why I love what Lexington One is doing, like many other districts. They have active consent processes. If you don't want to have your child participate, it's okay. It's entirely okay. The other thing I'm not going to allay is this is not a diagnostic tool. It is not used as part of a school record. It is not used to diagnose. It is true that all of our indicators are normed. I mean, they got strong norms, and I have some slides I'll show you very briefly to walk you through the science behind what we do. And many of those indicators are used in clinics and other settings, but this is never meant to be other than information for you as the parent. So I just want to make sure that we're setting the agenda for what we're going to do next, and that's addressing some of the most common parent questions. Now, you may have others, and so that's why I want to go through this relatively fast, but then to entertain your questions. The biggest question always for many parents is, what is the role of the school in all this? And should they actually be promoting resiliency and behavioral health in school? That is a fundamental question that's been asked for over 100 years. What is the central role of the school? When we look at that, putting children first, what does that mean? What are we looking at? So here's the audience participation part. I bet you knew when you were going to show up. I bet you knew I was going to ask you some questions. But here's the first question. I just want to ask you. If there is one question you would want to know about your child, one question, what would that question be? Just think about it. By the way, I'm asking you a question that has been asked multiple times. So this is not me just throwing out a question. You don't even have to answer. The number one question that any parent wants is, how is my child doing? Not how is my child doing in a particular grade. Overall, how is my child doing? How do we know how they're doing, how our children are doing? And most of the time it's through, I would imagine, asking them, right? How are you doing? I have 2 adolescents myself. And when I ask my child, hey, how you doing? What's the typical response I get? It's the 4-letter F word, right? Fine. Yeah. And that's true. The great thing about this is that is probably true for the majority of our students. Even our own data says the majority of our students who take Terrace metrics, they're doing great, they're doing fine. But for some of those students, especially as they get older, they tend to start internalize, they tend to not share it with anyone. And there's data out there. Again, I'm not speaking on behalf of me, I'm speaking on behalf of the literature that's out there. Most commonly, a student, when they are struggling with something, they may share it with their best friend. That's about as far as it gets. If a great relationship, of course, they're going to share it with you. We'll pass that along. But for every student who's identified in the most traditional ways in school, right? The problem comes to a counselor or whatever else, 2 to 3 to go unidentified, and they struggle in silence. Make sense? So sometimes we tend to overassume what we know our child is doing. I'm not saying all the time. So if I was to create an experiment here, and I was to ask, and the reason I'm looking at you and not you is that you all congregated over there. So if I was to ask you, how is your child doing? And then I would ask your child, how are you doing? That's a correlation, right? A correlation is between 1, which means what I say and what my child says completely overlap. And 0 is what I say and what my child says, there is no overlap. That correlation is 0 to 1. The correlation traditionally between a parent and a child, especially as they get older, is 0.27. It's much closer to 0 than it is to 1. It's just that they keep it inside. And it's not anybody's fault. That's just the nature of it. Think about your own life, perhaps even in high school, where you had some peers that you knew were struggling, but it was never brought to the attention of someone. How my child is doing is the central question we all want to know. Now, why that's important, that directly leads to academic outcomes. It's not just how my child is doing, but we need to prepare our children for life after graduation, which is the next question. And this is what I really would like you to think about and answer. Your child becomes 18. What are the skills that you want your child to have that will give you the greatest confidence that they will succeed in life? What are some of those skills? And by the way, this is for anybody who has children. I bet you thought you were just going to sit there and listen. Here, I'm asking you. Please. Resiliency, that's the ability to work through adversity, right? I'll throw some other on, so you tell me if I'm wrong. Critical thinking, right? The ability to bounce a checkbook, that would be good. These are the most common ones. Any others? Oh, empathy, I love that one. Thank you. Empathy? Now, I've asked this question for 30 years. Same audience, parents, teachers. I don't think I've ever received a response. I want them to master their algebra. I want them to make sure that they got their homework. You know, that is important. That is a key, but that's not the only key when we think about education and what that means in terms of life skills for our children. We're actually collectively trying to teach those very skills you taught me when I was here. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, let's think about this. When we think about how should we prepare our students, this is, again, an age-old question. It goes all the way back to the foundations of education. And it's not only just our education philosophy, it's also coming from both sides of the political aisle. It comes from some of the greatest thinkers in America. All say basically the same thing, and all say that it's a whole child approach. Is that making sense? I don't want to sound preachy, because I'm not trying to be preachy, but I'm saying that your question is a very profound question. What should we be thinking about when we're educating our students? And this goes back to a man by the name of Benjamin Bloom back in the 1950s. He created this kind of a concept, and the concept is whatever we're trying to teach our children, it falls along that thing. We have to make sure that they have all of those skills in some way. Now, whether that's through traditional academic teaching or whether that's other things, that's Bloom's, and that is still the foundation for most of our education today. So the questions you're asking are not new, but we're trying to figure out a way, how do we make sure our children are in a place where they can optimally attend to their teachings, full stop. And that is where Terrace metrics come in. By the way, this whole idea of SEL, it's not new. It's just an extension of movements that have been around for quite some time. And that's this idea of wellness and whole child approach. I mean, ever since I was going to school many decades ago, there was always some movement. SEL is just kind of it's not a later stage, but it's been around since the late aughts. And I'll talk a little bit about why all of these movements are great in what they do. But in some respects, they also fall short. And that's why we come to the whole child approach. And that is in 2021, 1 in 5 students are facing significant adversity. Is it diagnosable? No. But adversity is adversity. It creates distress. And if it creates distress, it's significantly impacting their ability to learn. And as I've said, for every student that's identified through normal ways, 2 to 3 go undetected. And that's, of course, we know a lot of the inaction causes a huge cost to the student. Think back to the question I asked you. I'm sure you may have known some peers who have struggled in silence through high school. Well, there is a prediction curve of what happens to some of these students when they become adults. You know, their career choices, their personal choices, their social choices. And that leads to the central question we all have. Wouldn't it be great if we could figure out a way to identify an issue, not huge, but an issue as it first emerges? Here is my final question to you. And this is the literature again. How long does it take between a problem that first emerges to when it is actually brought to our attention in school so that we can help that student? How long do you think that takes, on average? You can just throw out a number. Times 10. Thank you. 10 years. Up to 10 years. As a student is younger, of course, they're going to act out. That's easy to see. But as the student gets older, they begin to internalize. Wouldn't it be great if we can catch those emerging issues so it's a lot easier to address, certainly less expensive, so that we can get to the student on the right track? And that is to fully focus on their schooling. That's the key to this whole thing. So the problem, by the way, we were talking, and I'm sorry if you can't see the numbers, but I'm going to walk over here. I don't know if am I on camera if I walk back and forth? Okay, all right. So these are the big three, right? The big three. We talk about the pandemic, and that is true. The pandemic has magnified our understanding of the impact of stress on learning. In fact, I think it was in the New York Times. I haven't read the articles, but they got a whole section on what the impact of COVID has had on reading and math. So it's always there. But this is our data. This is just a random selection of students pre-pandemic in 2019. I think the pandemic hit in 2020, right? Yeah. And now 2021. This is our latest data that we looked at. And these are all of schools who used our system for the first time. So it's not a longitudinal. It's just a snapshot of schools who've collected data or who are doing this for the first time. Anxiety, depression, and ostracism. Ostracism is the red one. No, the reason I bring this up is that our anxiety and our depression measures are commonly used in clinics. Again, this is not a diagnostic tool, but the indicators we use are the same ones used often in clinics. And the cut point is 8. 8 is a cut point, meaning that if I was a clinician and the student came to me and I gave the same measures, if they were at an 8, I'd say, let's think about additional resources. These are general samples of students. These are not students that are coming to any clinic or even recognized. These are just students who completed Terrace metrics for the first time. And you can see where their mean scores are. The pandemic magnifies. It did not, I mean, yes, it has enhanced it, but we've always had some of these issues. And these issues preclude a student from fully attending to their studies. The key is, what do we do with this information? By the way, ostracism, which is the biggest predictor of distress, usually depression and anxiety are downstream effects. Do I feel like I belong is the key one. Cut points there too, so they're above there. All of which is to say, this is an issue that's been ongoing. It wasn't created by COVID. So I want to get to the central itty-gritty, because sometimes we get this. We don't want SEL for whatever reason. I want to make sure we understand we're not an SEL company. We're behavioral health, or we're resiliency. Science of resiliency says this. It's one of the oldest ways. In fact, the resiliency framework precedes all of these movements by a factor about, you go back into the 50s and they're talking about what does it mean to be resilient, and that's the key that many of us identified in our students. What can we do to make sure they're going to succeed? Resiliency is the key. And that is working through adversity. It's not getting rid of adversity. It's can I work through the adversity? And what resiliency science says is if I've got specific strengths in place and supports around me and basic needs taken care of, then I can work through that adversity. And then by doing that, I can focus on my studies. But if those strengths start to diminish or they're eroding or they're no longer there, that's when adversity rears its ugly head. So it's not about getting rid of adversity. It's about, do I have the sufficient strengths in place to work through adversity if it's there? But even if I'm not dealing with adversity, everything is fine, but I've got vulnerabilities, meaning that some of my strengths are low, then I am vulnerable to the effects of adversity should it come my way. And I hope that that makes sense. SEL doesn't look at this, and I'm not casting aspersions on SEL. SEL isn't looking at both sides of the equation. It's looking at a snapshot of one part. We're looking at the whole child when we think about adversity. So we can't assume wellness from knowing only one dimension. By the way, all of this information that I'm presenting to you came directly from South Carolina. So it's a world-class institution. I was shaped by many of my professors back then, and it was the first time I actually thought about it in this way. And what we're trying to do here is students can be reasonably well, but they still struggle with adversity, and that's okay as long as their, what we call wellness, their resiliency characteristics are high enough. So if you think on the right-hand side of the equation, if my resiliency is high and my adversity is low, I'm fully capable of attending as much as I can on your studies, right? All things considered. But if I am here, which is the negative side, that's the area we really want to catch, because those, we could address those issues relatively fast if we can catch them fast enough. And even if students have been struggling in silence, this is a mechanism for the first time for many of our students to get whatever their needs are addressed. That's the whole key. So it's making sure that we're using the resiliency side to capture that low end of that resiliency adversity interaction. We call it behavioral health because we're looking at both, and why we call it behavioral health and not SEL, because it's not SEL, is if you look, if we address just the SEL, and we look at academic improvements, what we call effect sizes, that is how powerful are these interventions? They're moderate, mild to moderate. If we look at both sides of the equations, that is not only improve the strengths of the student, but get the students the resources they need to address whatever the adversity is. And then we look at their outcomes, their academic outcomes, those are stronger, much stronger. So that's why it's a much more robust predictor of academic functioning. We also know this, how a student sees themselves, sees their world, sees their future is directly related to how they do in their classroom by GPA, by state standardized test scores, and others. All of which, that is the direction. You improve their behavioral health, you improve their academic outcomes. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, I'm not here to convince, I'm here to explain why we're doing what we're doing. So what are these indicators? And that gets to here. And that gets to the central question. So what you're seeing here, why are we including these resiliency indicators? These are the most robust indicators. Each one of their own have been shown in the literature to be unique predictors of GPA and state standardized test scores. What you're seeing in green are the ones that are offered to grades 3 through 5. All of them are offered to grades 6 through 12, but grades 3 through 5 are the ones in blue. I'd like to explain a little bit, because sometimes we get questions from parents and it's like, I don't know what these indicators mean. So let me explain to you some of these. Of course, grit means sense, right? Grit means tenacity, to stick with something, to not give up, to not be caught up with the next shiny thing that comes along. Hope. We've seen this. Hope is I've got a goal, but something is blocking my goal. Can I come up with strategies to work around that block? And am I motivated to do that? And we've all done this, right? I've got something blocking me. Let's try this. That didn't work. Let's try this. So high hope students are able to select plan B, then plan C, then plan D until they get that goal met. Low hope students, they've got basically one strategy that they use for everything, and if that strategy doesn't work, what happens? They give up, right? That's hopelessness. The goal of hope is, and now it sounds kind of like soft, but what hope is one of the most researched constructs, and is how do we improve strategies? You know, so if we're working with a student and they go, I don't know, we don't want to solve that problem for the student. We want them to develop that skill to create multiple strategies. So that's what hope is. Another one is global satisfaction. You can do this yourself. I'll ask you a question you don't need to answer, but think about your life in the past 6 months. How you doing? That's a simple question. But you have to think of all the things in your life that are very important to you. And then you have to make a summative score based on that. And that, believe it or not, is one of the biggest predictors of GPA outside of mastery of content, how a student sees themselves, their world, and their future. So we're just tapping into things that are very important and all can be improved if they are low. That's resiliency. Now, the adversity side, all of these would be indicators that would be considered, yes, that would interfere with the ability to focus on our studies. Again, what is in the blue is what is offered to younger children. All the others. I want to make sure that we all understand a couple of things. Schools get to choose the indicators. We don't thrust any indicator on schools. They get to choose the indicators that they want. And that can vary by grade. grade, and it can vary by group, it could vary by school, it doesn't matter. So we wanted to make sure that the schools have flexibility in choosing the indicators. Another question that many parents ask is, well, who owns this data? The schools do. We are FERPA compliant. We can't see your data. We don't want to see your data. Only specific team members in each school can see this data. The only ones who can see the individual student data is counselors, social workers, school psychologists, nurses if you're lucky, and key members of the school administration. That's it, nobody else. Teachers do not have access to individual data. And the only other one that does is parents. That's it. So I just want to address that and also to show you the indicators that are offered, but again, it's up to the school to decide. Big one. Are they controversial because we're talking about other things that have come along, maybe an offshoot of the COVID, among other things? So do they contain controversial items that can't be reviewed? Absolutely not. We encourage parents, please come to the school to review these items. The reason we can't release these items to you is that they have copyright protection themselves. But you have every right to see these items. That's why we don't want to release them to the community. But take a look at the items. See, these are resiliency items. None of these items are meant to be intrusive because for two reasons. That's not the purpose of this. If we go too deep, now we're getting into diagnostic territory. That's not what this is for. But number two, if we get too deep, the student is probably not going to be very valid because now you got impression management among other things. So when you go to the school and look at the items, you're going to see there is no elements that you go, no, I don't want my child taking that. And it's asking the child their perspective, not anybody else's perspective. So that's the resiliency side. And then I'm going to burn a lot of calories by walking back and forth. I appreciate you coming. And then these are the examples of ostracism and anxiety and depression and self-criticism. But again, we have all of them available for you. You just have to come to the school to look at them. All right. Are parents involved in the process? We are the only company that actively involves parents, actively. And what I mean by that is not only is the student report generated, but a parent report is generated. Now, it is not sent immediately. That's up for the school to decide when to send the report, but many of you receive the report, and you'll see what I'm saying. It's interactive. And what you were able to do by receiving your report on your child, first of all, that addresses the central question, how's my child doing? Now you know, at least from your child's perspective. If there's anything that's showing, for example, in the at-risk, you simply click on the indicator, it goes to videos and other resources that help you understand, what can I do at home? And it's never finger-pointed, it's always working as a community. So in this case, this is Mickey Mouse. Maybe you heard of Mickey Mouse, but I might be Mickey's dad, and I see that ostracism is flagged. I don't even know what ostracism is. But if I click on that, it's going to go to my video. It's going to explain this is what ostracism is, and this is what I can do as a parent to promote that at home. And it's all about making sure that the students, those basic needs are met so that they are able to focus on their studies. Other ways that we do this, we have parent nights. So exactly what we're doing here, we do this with every district. I took it upon myself to come and do this one because I love Lexington One, but we have a whole team doing this. We also do post-administration workshops. What's going to happen with this data is that it comes and it's collected and schools have a report. And we're going to work with the schools to identify what are the indicators we want to promote, maybe as a preventative measure. But whatever is chosen, we then offer a workshop, and we're hosting that for you as well. So let's say, for instance, in your child's school, not your child, but your child's school, they really want to focus on grit this year. We'll host a parent workshop so that you can learn what can we do to promote grit at home. We have bi-weekly hobnobs. Hobnobs are great. So we're sending out a link at the end of either next week or the week after, where you can sign up. It's like open office hours, where you can, just you and a member of Terrace Metrics can review your findings, if you'd like, or parents come together and we'll talk about a very essential topic. Is data secure? What's the data behind all this? And that's the biggest one. So I gotta tell you something, you don't wanna have a Diet Coke or any beverage with me, because all I wanna talk about is data. I'm a very boring man in that way. But I do want to let you know that there is a lot of thought. We created this in 2018, but this is, in 2018, whatever we created was a byproduct of 3 years of thought. And that is, do we follow all the best practices? And we call it the Fevers model, which as you can see right there. We're the only company that says yes to any of this. Are you familiar with the MTSS model? We're the only one that addresses and can provide. So the MTSS model, I can show you in just a second here. What it's designed to do is to address academically and non-academically, it's applied to both, whether something should be preventative, or do we have a group that we could focus on to improve, or maybe it's an individual service that we need to work on, and it's a triangle. Most companies out there provide information just on the preventative side. We're the only one that provides information because of how we do this on all areas of the MTSS model. So we are MTSS compliant, and that's the biggest framework that, most schools do. Everything we say, everything we show you, you can go online, you can get our white papers. We're the only one that publishes our white papers on the psychometric properties of our studies on site. We fully comply with everything. We don't see your data. We actually have a workplace version that's used in not only in schools, but healthcare settings, first responders like police officers, among others. So we have to be not only FERPA, but we are HIPAA compliant. We provide all the training. So we don't just release this. Every one of the teams in each school is extensively trained by us. And then finally, more importantly, it's rapidity of data. You want to get these results as soon as you can. So as soon as the child is done, that team gets the results and you have access to those results right away. You don't have to wait. All right, so here's for the, I won't go very far. This is the statistician in me. Because we get a lot of this, well, how do you know it's working? So I'm gonna show you something, but you go ahead and reach out to us. We'll send you this big validity paper. It's like 15 pages, but if you're really into the data, we'll show it to you. And this is the data that we have so that we're recognized by all, every state's Department of Education, including we're pending here in South Carolina. But this is called reliability. What reliability means is that, am I being truthful in my responses on the items that I'm given? And the rule of thumb for at least clinics, even though this is not meant for clinics, is 0.90. For anything else, 0.70 is great. So this is what you're seeing in terms of 2017 and 2018. This is based on, what was a random sample, 27,000 students. And you're gonna see that these, for high school and middle school students, there wasn't any difference between the two. So all of the reliabilities are very strong, regardless of race and cultural background. I'm not showing you the sex because I didn't want to get into things. The reliabilities are 0.90 or greater for older students. And then for younger students, it's the same way, 0.80 or greater. We constantly monitor the psychometric, the construct validity of this. We want to make sure that it is as accurate and predictable as possible when we're thinking about academics. That's what this whole thing is. As the student takes this, when the student takes this, if you've received a report, you know what this is. This is the color codes. This is what the team receives. And it's all based on this continuum right here. Optimal, satisfactory, moderate, concern, or at risk. That is not at risk to a mental outcome. It's at risk to ability to focus on my studies. That's what this is about. If I'm in the at-risk range, it means I really don't have a lot of resiliency and I'm struggling with some things, and that's precluding me from fully attending to my studies. We are going to, what the team is understanding is how the student is overall, and if there's any indicators, they'll know exactly the kind of resources that are necessary to help that student, to improve that. Because if we can improve their behavioral health, we improve their academic outcomes, and I'll show you in just a second. Here. This is our 2019 data, randomly selected, close to 30,000 students, grades 3 through 12. In the fall of 2019, right before the pandemic, we were able to receive academic outcomes for these students. We don't know who these students are. We can only, we just link it to their ID number. But as you can see, if a student was in the at-risk range, they're collectively speaking, their GPA was significantly lower than if they were in the optimal range. And that pertains to all of those indicators. And I'm leaving some stuff out. But here's the key. All of those mean scores are significantly different, which means even if I was in the satisfactory range, which is great, but my mean score, collectively speaking, is lower than if I was in the optimal range. Optimal means I'm really rating a lot of my resiliency high, and I'm not rating any adversity. Make sense? It's not about identifying a student who's struggling. It's getting them moving so that they can fully attend to their studies. You can see, at least cross-sectionally, what happens, but also, more importantly, I'll show you what happens longitudinally because we've been following these students. Do we provide assessment? No, we're a full-service company. We are a full-service company. We provide, that's the MTSS model I was mentioning to you. So tier 1 would be, everybody gets it, for the purposes of making sure everybody gets that specific indicator and strengthens. But let's say you don't want to do that. Let's do tier 2. Let's just find those students who are low in grit, and let's just work with them. Our data will allow you to do that. We'll allow schools to do that. Maybe there's a tier 3. What tier 3 is okay, this is more individualistic, and that warrants probably maybe a referral out to the community. But we also have tools that we can train school teams when they're working directly with a student on things like anxiety and even depression. I know I'm talking a lot. I'm almost done, so I can turn it over to your questions. All right. When the school gets the report, we are going to sit with them and we're going to identify, first of all, collectively speaking, what's the behavioral health of every student, right? This is de-identified data. And then also, what can we do? What are we going to pinpoint on? And that would be allowing schools to focus for the next 3 or 4 months on a specific indicator. Now it's data informed rather than throwing something at the thing. What bothers me, and as a taxpayer myself, is in schools, thankfully it's not here, but in many schools, they purchase so many interventions. A lot of that money is going to interventions, but we don't know how effective it is. The data, because they don't have the data allows us to understand, are these interventions effective for the purposes that we're purchasing it for? So this allows us to pinpoint specifically what could be improved, and then by doing that through our curriculum and other curriculum, what we know now is this: we can improve outcomes. Not only here, so here to answer any questions you have that I haven't. Yeah.
As far as the intervention, is that school-wide, even though some students did not test? Or is it individualized, like my child took it and she scored low? How does her curriculum differ from other children's?
Yeah, it could be easily customizable. It really depends on the percentage of students that have collectively said, we're really low on grit. So if you got like 55% of your students in the at-risk range on grit, then that could warrant a tier 1. Or it could warrant, just get those 55 students who said that they're low, and let's just do group interventions. That's a tier 2.
So that would be during school, they would be pulled out from the class, and they would be worked within the classroom?
Yeah.
In their math class, within their social studies class?
I could tell you how most districts do, and these are excellent questions you're asking. The curriculum is never intended to add anything on a teacher who volunteers to do this. It's usually in one of the classrooms, like a homeroom classroom. It's only a half hour. It's only 3 learning lessons that extend over 6 to 8 weeks. And what it is, it's called, well, I'll get into it. It's called Launch, Learn, and Live. Launch is the first learning plan where the teacher explains what grit is. I'm using that as an example. And what happens then is the students have an assignment that they have to practice outside of school. It's to understand what they are grit. I mean, they may not think that they're not gritty. They are grit. They just haven't realized that. Then they come back in 2 weeks and they're going to do learn. How do I improve my grit? And so the student, again, gets an assignment, and they're going to monitor their own progress on their grit skills. And all the teacher's doing is just on a weekly basis monitoring how they're doing in their homework. And then finally, after 6 to 8 weeks, they all return back for another just final half hour, and that's live. Now that I've improved it, how do I apply it to larger areas of my life? Again, it's all outside, it's all skills development. That could be done at tier 1 or even or tier 2.
So here the answer is yes, yes.
I'm just wondering, like, you know, where do those children get the intervention? Where is that applied?
So what we have planned out when we get the data back in counseling, we got 3 months of interventions. We'll do it individually, and we may depend on the data. If a school has a weakness or a group has a weakness, we'll target that. Depends on the results, and we'll target that. But we have 3 months of interventions planned once we do the initial assessment that we're going to target.
And do the parents have, you know, if their child did score low, do the parents have the option to say, no, I know my child scored low, but I'd rather handle it outside of school versus you pull my child into a class?
That's exactly correct. We had some parents last year that said, no, I've already got an outside counselor. I'm already working with this. I'm good. We don't need anything. And we say thank you.
A lot of this is based on hope. You know, you don't really need to go somewhere. You're just learning how to improve your ability to just create. Well, that would have been great on a video. But how do I improve my strategy formulation? So a lot of this stuff, especially at Tier 1, that doesn't warrant outside interventions. Just how do I improve what I'm saying I don't have?
Hi, and I apologize. I wasn't planning on attending this. I didn't know there was going to be a presentation. But at around 7 this morning, I went online and I checked the I do not give consent. So I apologize for bringing this up in this forum, but there seems to be a glitch with the website. When I clicked on I do not give consent, I got a sorry unexpected error. I hit refresh. It came back, thanks for your reply. And then it went back to sorry error message. So it's going back and forth, and I do not know whether it captured my response, and if it did capture it, did it capture the correct response? So I do not want a glitch in the system to cause my son to be given this assessment when I did not give consent.
If you replied to the original email, I can check that for you. Like the original email that's sent out.
I actually responded to I think there was a reminder email that came out first thing this morning, so it sparked my memory, and I clicked on that one, and that's when I got the error message. So I went back to the original email, and I clicked do not give consent on that one.
If you hit reply, like if you're sending an email.
No, I'm not replying to an email. I'm clicking, there's action buttons within the email.
Correct, but if you reply to the email, it will go to me.
Oh, if I reply to the email,
Yes,
okay,
if you
itself.
reply to the email, and then I can check that for you.
Oh, okay, I understand.
Then I'll get your email, then I'll get your information and who your child is, and I can check that in the system for you.
Okay, so I apologize for bringing that up here, but maybe others may be experiencing that, and
Yes,
they may have the same question.
There is an error in the system this morning,
Okay.
because I saw that as well as I was checking some other people's information. So I can double check that for you.
And I apologize, I have to excuse myself, I have a meeting.
Thank you for coming. Other questions? Thank you for coming. I appreciate that. Just real quickly, to your thing, always contact us, info@Terrace Metrics. I'm going to give you my personal email, which is Gilman@Terrace Metrics. It's 1L. I don't deserve the second. I haven't earned it yet. Gilman, Gilman@terracemetrics.org. Always happy to answer your questions in real time.
And I did want to make a point of clarification that the individuals that do have access to our specific student data in this district, we have selected that school counselors, school psychologists, and select administrators have access to individual student data in our district. Those are the individuals that only have access. So those are the ones that we selected in this district. So I did want to clarify that.
So they want to make sure. Questions?
I think you mentioned that something about last year, this is what we did or whatever. Was this done last year as well?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yes,
so
ma'am.
this won't be the first time that okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Coming. I'll get my steps
I
in
don't
too.
want to ask anybody personally, but maybe you have heard,
Yes, ma'am.
because I'm on the fence. Why would parents not want it done? Has anybody come to you and said, this is why I don't want my child?
I can tell you what schools have said. They don't normally, what we get is thank you. We get tons of that. I think that's a fear that this data is going to somehow be embedded in the school's record, as number one, or there's going to be folks outside of this, of the team that are going to see this data. That's two. No and no. Three, it is, well, the school has no business of being part of that. We understand, we respect that. Those are usually the big three I've heard.
Okay.
Yeah. You're welcome. Our goal, of course, is to, as was mentioned, offer you the service. Man, I tell you, the purpose of today was to make sure that, I'm gonna need more coffee, yeah, and probably ibuprofen if I actually do take a tumble, but the purpose of today was to make sure that you're more aware and understood why we're doing this and how it is leading to the very questions we were asking at the beginning. How is my child doing? And what does this have to do with learning? They're both sides of the equation. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming. And anybody who's online, thank you.